In this section, we're going to go over the design of the app that we're going to be building in this course. The app we're going to build is the Recipe API. So the Recipe API can be the backend component and database of a recipe app. Once we built the API, you might want to use it for creating a mobile app, such as an Android or an iOS app, or a web app. So that's just an app that runs in the browser and uses our API to do certain functionality. We're not going to be actually building the front end in this course. We're just going to be focusing on the back end and the database of the app. So by the end of the course, you should have a fully functioning REST API that performs the features needed for a recipe app. We're going to add the following features to our API. We're going to have 19 different endpoints, and those endpoints are going to allow us to do things such as manage users, manage recipes in the app, create tags, and create ingredients. The API is also going to handle user authentication. So users will be able to register via the API, and then we can handle authentication in the API. So we can identify which user is making changes to which components in the database. We're also going to have a browsable admin interface using the Django admin. So this is going to be really useful as we're developing our app because it will allow us to see the different database components that are being created as we test our API. We'll be adding a browsable API to our API. What this is a browsable web page that allows us to view all of the different endpoints in our API and allows us to make test requests to these endpoints. This is really useful for testing the API and also useful when you have other developers working on the project that might be using the API, because they can get all of the documentation for the API in one place and it's generated automatically using something called Swagger UI. I'll give you a quick overview of all of the endpoints that we're going to create. This is a view of the Swagger UI page that we're going to be creating, and it contains all of the endpoints. So I'm going to go over what all of the endpoints are and explain what they do. The first endpoint is the health check endpoint. This is simply going to be used to check that our API is healthy. That means that it is online. Below that, we have the Recipe Ingredients API. This will allow us to get a list of ingredients using HTTP GET. We can use put or patch to update the contents of a specific ingredient, and we can use HTTP delete to delete ingredients in our database. Then below that, we have all of the recipes APIs. We have a get and post for getting a list of recipes and creating a new recipe. And we have the specific ID endpoints that allow us to get a recipe with a particular ID and also update it using put and patch. We can also use the delete method to delete a recipe using its ID. We're going to be adding a special upload image API for uploading images to our recipes. The reason we don't include this in the standard recipe create API is because you don't want to mix the different data types that we'll be posting to the APIs. When we create a recipe, we're just going to be creating a JSON document, whereas when we upload an image, we're actually going to be uploading some binary data. So we want to keep those separate because it's a lot easier to use it that way in the front end. I'll explain more about that as we go and create these APIs later in the course. Below the recipes, we have the tags APIs, which allow us to create and manage tags in the system. So we can get a list of tags using HTTP GET. We can use put and patch to update tags, and we can use delete to delete a tag. Then we have the schema API, which allows us to get a schema document, which basically defines our API, and that's how Swagger creates this page. That's an automatically generated API that is added with the Django REST framework. Finally, at the bottom, we have the user APIs. This allows us to create a user and also create an authentication token so the user can log in. So that's an overview of the app we're going to be building. Let's move on to the next lesson.